All right, welcome to the next lecture. I lost count, so we'll find out what number this is, but today we're going to talk about fallacies, first of all, and then crime and security. I really enjoy the topic of fallacies. It's a fun thing to teach, and I haven't taught it before. So let's get right on into it. And so, what is a fallacy? And I stole a lot of these examples from the internet, so just a warning, but they're good examples, I think. So a fallacy is when you're making an argument and you use the wrong moves, okay? It's like if it were a sport, arguing. You used a move that was illegal, not allowed, all right? You forfeited the game. So we're going to talk about what kinds of arguments are not correct, that are not allowed, that are fallacious. So a fallacy, it's when you make an error in reasoning during the course of an argument. So you tried to argue something, but you messed up, or you didn't know that you're using a fallacy and it was not true. And the key takeaway is that any argument that is fallacious, that's the adjective form, is automatically false, and you cannot trust it. Okay, so it is no longer the case, whatever this person was arguing or whatever you were arguing. If it had a fallacy in it and that was your main way to get to the conclusion, it was wrong. Okay, and it's really important to discover fallacies and to learn about them because everybody's using them. You probably have in the past, and anybody you interact with that's trying to convince you of something may use them. So people, corporations, governments, the list goes on. They might use fallacies to try and manipulate you or other people. So we gotta unmask all the fallacies today. All right, so let's start with the first one. It's called false dilemma. And for some reasons that we'll see later, it's also called false dichotomy or black and white fallacy. So the idea is when you use this kind of false dilemma fallacy in your argument, you're making the case that there are only two possibilities or some small number, when really there are more than that. Okay, so somebody's trying to argue there's either two cases, X or Y. Okay, that's all you get. You got to choose one. And when in reality, there's probably Z and P and Q and W, and the list goes on forever, you know? So it's not the case that there's only X or Y. There's probably more to choose from. And that is the crux. That is the essence of the false dilemma, all right? So just keep that in mind, and you will be able to find examples of these pretty easily. And so here's an example. There are only two kinds of people in the world: people who love Phoebe Bridgers and people who hate music. Okay? It's probably, unfortunately, true that there are people who still like music but hate Phoebe Bridgers. And I guess that's okay. Maybe somebody really likes classical music and they don't like it when people sing. Something like that. That's definitely a counterexample to this argument. There is more than just a group of people who like Phoebe Bridgers and then a group of people who hate music. There's something in between. Like there's a Venn diagram and it looks like that. It doesn't look like that. Okay? That's the idea. And then an example from Wikipedia is, Stacy spoke out against socialism, so she must be a fascist, which is an interesting argument coming from Wikipedia. It's very strong. All right. But obviously Stacy could be a socialist for all we know. It's fine to be a member of something and to criticize parts of it. That's okay. So there's not just two types of people in the world, socialists and fascists, for example. And a fun pin when I search for this on Google Images. Okay. Ad populum is the next one. And you'll notice that a lot of these have, if you go and look them up, and some of them more today, have Latin names. And what that means is that back in the day when all the logicians were getting started, like in Rome or Athens or whatever, they came up with these fallacies. Okay, they've been around for a while. And so a more recent name is the bandwagon fallacy, and it'll become obvious for that later. What ad populum means, if you've ever taken a Latin class, it's to the populace, or to the popularity. So it's when you're making an argument for something, and your conclusion is that something's true or okay or it's good just because a lot of other people think that it is so. Okay, and we've actually talked about that a little bit when we talked about what truth is. So the idea is there's a bunch of people. There's the populace. they're all making the case for X is good, X is good, X is awesome, I love X so much. And there's enough of them that it causes you to believe that, oh yeah, X, okay, maybe that's good. X is okay. All these people like it. Surely it's all right. And that's, of course, a fallacy. That means nothing. And we'll have some examples of that in just a second. So one of the main ways that you have seen this before is in, like, advertisements. So they try to get you with this ad populum fallacy all the time. Drink Gatorade, for example, because that's what all the professional athletes use. Obviously, you should use it too. That's how they stay hydrated. It's the best. You better get it. Buy that large pack of Gatorade from Costco. And the idea is this is wrong. This is a false statement. It's not, you can't go to the conclusion of drink Gatorade. This is not a good assumption, okay? That means nothing. A better argument would be something like, oh, drink Gatorade because it replenishes all of the salt that you lost when you were exercising. And it does that better than water, does that better than some other brands, okay? So that would be an okay argument for Gatorade, but this one is fallacious, all right? And then others like Jimi Hendrix, he used Fender Stratocasters, or Strats, and the sound is beautiful. And so if I go from this and then argue that, oh yes, my life will not be complete without one, because Jimmy used one, that is, again, an ad populum fallacy. Just because somebody else uses it is not a good reason for me to use it too, okay? If I make the argument that, oh, I want one because the sound is beautiful, and Jimi Hendrix's music is a great example of that. That's a better argument, okay? Then you have a real reason. Whereas this is just like, we're jumping on the bandwagon and trying to go with everybody else, with the school of fishes that is moving in one direction. And then, this might hit close to home for some of us, my parents believe this, so I guess I should too. That's an ad populum fallacy. That is how some very outdated beliefs keep getting tossed into the limelight these days. All right? So that is the ad populum fallacy. And let's keep going. All right, this one's called circular reasoning, and it's going to make sense. This is a fun picture I saw on Google. Fun or sad, depending on how you think about it. Circular reasoning is when you keep on repeating your assumption as your conclusion, okay? I guess technically this is not circular reasoning, but it's still a circle, close enough. So it sounds like it should be really easy to notice this, like, oh, somebody's just saying their conclusion again, saying that assumption that they made, that thing that they're trying to argue as their conclusion. So it's like they're saying, ah, yes, assume X, therefore X implies X. That's the idea. Obviously, yeah, you assumed it. No, that's not going to work. So, like, assume X. Therefore, X is always true. No, dude, you just assumed it. Okay, this is also called begging the question, and you may have heard of that before. So, a lot of times, people can get you on this with large words. So something like, I think this was also from Wikipedia, opium induces sleep because it has a soporific quality. When in reality, this word just means sleep causing, okay? So that is an argument that says nothing. It means absolutely nothing, because it's like, oh yeah, opium induces sleep because it induces sleep. Yeah, totes. All right, then another one. Everyone wants to buy Phoebe Bridgers' new album because it's the hottest album this season. Well, this is just saying the same thing twice. Everyone wants to buy it, and it's the hottest album. You see that? That's not a good argument. There's no reason behind it. It's, again, you're repeating your assumption as your conclusion. And this one, you might have heard something like this before. Okay, it's really not the easiest of things to notice circular reasoning. And here's a very long one. Maybe pause this and I'll let you read it yourself. I'll read it to myself in my head. Dun dun dun. This is the assumption. This is the assumption right here. It's really good for everybody to express their thoughts, which is the same as everybody should have unbounded freedom of speech. See that? So the flowery words, again, this is a very something that can happen with politics, and so this is a great time to talk about it. C, notice circular reasoning. Look past the big words, look past the long flowery sentences that aren't really saying anything at all. Okay? That is circular reasoning. Very interesting, I think. All right, denying the antecedent, and this is a logical term, antecedent. This is from logic, if you want to look that up. It's a fun little term. And so this reasoning is a bit more formal because it has to do with formal logic, not just people saying stuff. This is like an informal fallacy, ad populum, things like that. This is a formal one, so it has to do with logic. And the way that you end up with this fallacy is you assume this, and then you try and prove, and then you conclude the fact that, yes, this is true. So if P, then Q, we assume. And then you conclude that, if I didn't have P, then I must not have had Q. Okay, and that's false. And we can draw truth tables to explain it, but I think the easier way is through an example. So here's one. If you are a ski instructor, then you have a job. Okay, or pick your favorite profession here. And all right, so that's if P, then Q. So P is you are a ski instructor. Then you have a job, Q. And so this is right here not P, and we're trying to prove not Q. Based on that, we're trying to go from here to here. So you are not a ski instructor, so that's not P. Therefore, you have no job, not Q. Do you see that this is not a conclusion that you can actually make? It's invalid, okay? Nope. You cannot conclude that. So, hopefully it makes sense. Surely, this is true. This is a true assumption. This one right here, that's totally fine. And then, but this jump right here from, well, you're not a ski instructor, so you must not have a job. There are many cases where you can have a job, but you're not a ski instructor, right? So, I don't know. Maybe you're a teacher. So you're definitely not a ski instructor, but you have a job. So if you look past the formality of it, it really is kind of logical. So you assume if P, then Q, then you're like, oh, well, if you didn't have P, then you must not have had Q. The backwards actually works. If you say if not Q, then not P, that's actually true. And you can try that out. That's a logical thing. Those are equivalent. This is not equivalent to that. Okay? We cannot do logical magic and get that one to look like that one. Okay. So hopefully this example made it a bit more clear, and that you'll be able to recognize it from now on. Well, let's keep moving. All right, this next one is called tu quoque, and this is Latin. It's Latin for you too. So the argument is like, hey, you too, bro, and that's the argument. So this is also called a appeal to hypocrisy, and maybe you can see it from this little picture here. But what it does is it distracts. The main purpose of this tu quoque fallacy is that it's distracting from the main argument. Okay? There never was like a real defense. It's trying to deflect blame, which is not the same as saying like, yes, your point is incorrect for X, Y, and Z. And so the best example of this is take any country that the US has criticized recently, maybe Russia, maybe China, other large countries, things like that, for whatever their most recent human rights violation has been. Okay, so there's plenty of examples that we can come up with. And then the country, Russia, has done this in the past. Russia responds by reminding the US that they've done stupid things as well. So we have messed up also. And so, well, you did it too. That's my argument. Surely it wasn't that bad. But it's okay. That's not the case. That is a fallacy because you can be a hypocrite and still be correct, okay? That's the idea. You can be a hypocrite and still be right. So sure, the US has done stupid stuff, and they're not trying to say that it wasn't the case, that it was stupid. But when they say that Russia did something wrong and it was wrong, just the fact that the US has done it too doesn't mean it's right. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. So you can be a hypocrite sometimes and still be correct in saying that, hey, what you just did was wrong, even though I've done it before too. It was also wrong there. Maybe we'll eventually realize that, if we hadn't already. Many examples of this. Okay, that's two quoque. It's a fun word, quoque. That's Latin. All right, genetic fallacy, and I have a lot of words here. So this one is when you're trying to argue something. And again, all these fallacies, remember, it's incorrect to make these kinds of assumptions, these kinds of arguments. Your conclusion is false whenever you make them. And this genetic fallacy is when you base an argument only on the origin of something, like the history. So back in the day, it was like this, whereas now it might be different. Okay, so time has passed, and you're trying to talk about the past. Okay, about the past or the origin of something. When is irrelevant to the argument. Well, it's irrelevant to the case. So abstractly, like I was kind of trying to say, something used to be bad back in the day, but times have changed, and that concept from before, it does not apply anymore. Okay, and so here's an example that I stole from a website, either Wikipedia or the place that I linked at the beginning. It's like, you're not going to wear a wedding ring, right? Didn't you know the original symbolization of the wedding ring? And you can keep reading if you'd like. How dare you be so sexist and wear a wedding ring? Just because the origins of a wedding ring maybe were not so nice. And I didn't confirm any of this, but I'm just going to assume that, okay, sure, this was a thing. Well, obviously, a wedding ring means something completely different nowadays. Okay? It has nothing to do with the past. It has to do with, I don't know, two people. That's all. That's the whole point. And so you can still be... It doesn't make sense to make this argument, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. The origins, the genetics of a wedding ring have nothing to do with the way it's currently being used. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. Another good example is this news story about the Purple Party. Well, whichever one that is. Tried to make a color that's in between everything. So this news story about the Purple Party candidate has to be fake. It can't be real because the story was made by XYZ News. And that station's owned by some people or someone who is against the Purple Party. And again, this is a fallacy. To go from this to go from this fact to the fact that to the idea that the story must have been fake. They just hate this party. Well, that's not the case. Maybe they're just reporting new news, and maybe it was a bad piece of news about the Purple Party, but that doesn't mean it's not true just because a station that's known to be owned by somebody who doesn't like the Purple Party is the case. Okay, so again, I guess this is like, there isn't always a bad motive, okay? The origins of something don't matter. Origins have no impact on truth. Okay. That is the genetic fallacy. It's an interesting one. All right, moving on to the Strawman fallacy. Just a few more now. Last two. This one's fun. A cute little Strawman. It's almost Halloween. This is when you try and make a Strawman, which is like a very, I don't know. It's easy to like the wind can blow over a Strawman, right? That's the idea. It's when you take a position, like you're arguing against your opponent, and you attacked a position that your opponent doesn't actually have. So you try and make their argument one that it was not before. one that can be knocked over very easily. Okay, you turn their argument into another one that can be easily defeated. It's made of straw. It's a straw man. All right. So here's one from Wikipedia. That was fun. So this is a closing argument from a trial, actually, a bank robbery case, and this just goes to show that these kinds of fallacies, they show up in law. Like, these very educated people, they're making these arguments, and they are not true. All right, so here's the argument by a lawyer. I submit to you that if you can't take this evidence and find these defendants guilty, then we might as well just open all the banks and say, come on and get the money, boys, because we'll never be able to convict them. And so this is trying to say that, all right, if we don't convict these guys, we might as well just kiss our money goodbye, because everybody's just going to start stealing from banks based on the precedent from this case. Okay, and that's obviously not true, because maybe there are some facts about this case that made it so that the guiltiness of the defendants is not, like, clear. Okay? Innocent until proven guilty, right? So it makes no sense to make this kind of argument. It's trying to say that if we don't convict these people, we're going to have so much more crime. We'll never be able to deal with crime ever again. And that's obviously not true. Okay? So that's a position that the opponent didn't actually hold. Okay? They're just trying to argue for these specific defendants in this specific case. That's all. All right? And then another one, person A. Well, the children's winter concert at the school, I think it should include some non-Christmas songs too. I like some non-Christmas songs. There are some winter-themed songs. They'd be nice. Then person B was like, you won't be happy until Christmas songs are banned from being played on the radio, I bet. Obviously, if that's what you're trying to say. When in reality, this person maybe just likes a really nice Coldplay song that's about the Christmas time, but doesn't reference Christmas. Something like that. Who knows? All right? They never said this, okay? Do you see that? They never said this, and this person is jumping to conclusions. They're trying to attack an argument, or they're trying to attack a position of that person A that they didn't actually hold. Okay, so this is more common than you would expect, and maybe this one is a bit more, makes it a bit more clear that this is a thing that happens. There are some cases of jumping to conclusions, okay? That happens an awful lot. Okay? And, alright, moving on now to the last one. This one's called ad hominem. And so, again, ad populum, to the populace, to the popularity, to the people. I guess I should say that too. Why not? Ad hominem means to the man, or to the person. So this is when, as you can see on the right here, you're just attacking somebody, and that's your argument. All right, so it's when you attack the arguer instead of the argument. Okay, so the arguer is not the problem. You're not trying to argue that the arguer is a horrible person. You're trying to argue that their argument is a horrible argument. And so this attack that you're giving, you're trying to support your conclusion that your arguer is incorrect, just based on that attack. So that's not right, right? So here are some examples, and this happens all the time. It's like a shouting match at some points. Happens a lot in politics too. So Jones clearly likes a football team from the East Coast. Clearly he's unfit to be a police chief in California. This is trying to imply that just because he likes East Coast things, he doesn't belong on the West Coast. When in reality, maybe he has a great record. Who knows? That's the idea there. So he could be fit for his job, but still like a weird football team. Who knows? I don't know a lot about football. Sorry. And then, all right, here's some more. You cheated and lied to your wife, but you expect the jury to believe you now. So this is when. And now assume that the case is something completely different. So this is a fallacy, but it's actually quite convincing to the jury, probably. Like, you've lied before, you probably lied now. But this is ad hominem. This is saying that you You did something wrong that's irrelevant to the case at hand, and now we're trying to now you're trying to go and argue that you were innocent for some completely different thing. Again, this goes back to, let's see, which one was it? The genic? No. Dun dun dun. Ah yes, this one, tu quoque. You can still be a hypocrite and be right. You can still have lied before and be not lying now, okay? That's the idea. There we go. And then ad hominem, finally, you're too young to understand. So, I don't know, maybe you've heard this before. This again is a fallacy. It's not true. It's an incorrect argument. Like, you can't handle the truth. You're too young for it. You wouldn't understand what's happening right now. When in reality, that is sometimes not the case, right? You can read up about some topic that you don't know about, things like that. So you're attacking the person. You're too young for this. Rather than, well, okay, you haven't taken calculus yet, so obviously you're not going to understand what an integral means. Something like that. That's a better argument. It's actually using facts, whereas this is just attacking the person itself. Okay? So that is a long list of fallacies. Okay? We have talked about quite a few, and I would like you to go over these and make sure that you can spot them, okay? Because that is a great thing to put on a test, not the year midterm, but maybe the final, all right? So, know when each of these is which, okay? That's the idea. All right, so now let's move on to a little bit more, and we'll see if we can end this today, but we might have to wait until next time. So let's talk about crime and security now. It's a bit of a jump, I know. So let's talk about some bad stuff that's happened due to technology. Like, technology is supposed to be so good, it still has issues, right? There have been so many advances. We love technology, and yet sometimes it is not good for us. It does things bad, or bad things happen that would not have happened if technology weren't a thing. And also, we want to answer the question, like, how can we stay secure on the internet and other places? So I think the first thing, when you think of crime and you think of technology, you might think of hacking. And so let's talk about that. Hacking, it actually used to be a positive term, if you'd believe that. It meant that somebody was really good with computers. And then there's a fun YouTube short film that I really encourage you to watch. It has this character called Hackerman. It's hilarious. So hacking back in the day, it just meant that somebody was really good with computers, okay? You're a hacker. You can understand this, you can teach me how to use a computer, you can program, you're awesome. And actually, still today, if you take further programming classes, you might hear your professor say, oh man, that was a hack. But it worked. And so, in programming lingo, hack actually means like a neat trick that you did to your program to get something to work. And that's the idea. So, hey, that was a cool hack. Or, that was a total hack, but my program works now. You might have to do that on some of your future programming assignments. And now, of course, it means bad things. So once we started linking computers, where do I say this? The internet. Poor internet. Once we started linking computers together, now we had the opportunity to do some damage, right? So people started to cause damage that were good. People that were good with computers started to cause damage, and things started happening. So the first thing that people managed to hack before we were connecting computers was actually phones. So maybe you have heard at least of payphones. So maybe you've watched, like, I don't know, Doctor Who. You got your payphone box. Inside of that is a little wall with a phone on it. You remember what the old phones used to look like, even? And so if you wanted to make a call, and this is also a bit, this was right at the end of my childhood where this was still a thing. If you want to make a call to some place that was in like a different area code, you had to pay more money, and then the telephone would route you to that or switchboard or whatever it is in the other county, the other state that you're trying to connect to. And the way that these payphones, these telephones, were connected. They were connected by sound. Like when you were making a call and like you put in a quarter, like I don't know, there was such a thing as a quarter sound. There's a special tone that got played by the payphone into like the speaker device, and it told the station at the other end that you're connected to that you just paid some money and it'll let you stay on the call for longer. Okay, so phone phreaking, that's how you pronounce it, they just made up a term, is when these people made devices that would fake those tones, and so you can actually call places for free and make international calls even. There's a fun story that I heard before, I think it was Steve Wozniak even from Apple, who had one of these devices and he tried to call the Pope at the time, and he was pretending that he was the president at the time. And I think he got all the way to the Pope's secretary. Or if it wasn't him, it was somebody else, which is a fun story that you can look up. But this is mostly innocuous. I mean, you're losing some money, but it's not too bad, right? Then when we started linking computers, we started having some issues. We had some worms and viruses. And so these terms are a bit odd. You might have heard them interchangeably even. So a virus and a worm are both bad things. They're bad programs. It's malicious program, but a virus needs to be activated. Like you need to double click some file that you downloaded from like a shady website, you double click a link in an email, that'll be a virus. It's waiting. Okay, it has to be activated by you doing something stupid or leaving your computer unattended. Like a bunch of government institutions are like, don't ever plug in a flash drive or report anybody who plugs in a flash drive to this computer because that can load a virus onto it. Okay, and then a malicious program that is like a virus, but it can self-replicate. It can move around. That's called a worm. Okay, that's the difference. A worm can self-replicate. It's like a parasite. And it can activate itself as well. Okay? And the internet, of course, allowed these to spread very, very rapidly. And that was a problem. So what happens these days is people understand that this is a thing and we need to protect against it. And so people are actually hiring hackers. They, you think of like some shady character wearing a black hat. Those are your hackers. A black fedora, who knows? That's a hacker. But a person that hacks for good is called a white hat hacker. He has a white hat. And companies, they hire hackers now to test their security. They go in, they try and steal. But they work for the company, and so it's not a big deal when they get through. They just change their security measures at that point and try and make it so that they can't hack it the next time. Okay? And so it's always good to do this. If you have a company, hire your own hackers before somebody else hacks your stuff. And then all this stuff, because we're linking computers over the internet, we now are getting people's information stolen. People are stealing personal and financial information like credit cards, and things are going very wrong. Okay, so some cool examples, 2 examples now. This first one's called Stuxnet, which is a worm, and it has an interesting backstory. So normally we think of worms like it's going to self-replicate and try and go as far as possible. Okay, it's going to try and infect every computer in the world if it can. Whereas this Stuxnet worm was targeted. It didn't infect all the computers. It only infected specific computers. Okay? That were running a certain kind of control system. Like you could, the worm was able to figure out what kind of hardware it was running on, and if it had this specific type of hardware, it would become alive. Okay? And I think they also, if I remember correctly, like they were checking that the date was displayed in an Iranian format or something like that. Something along those lines, and it only targeted specific kinds of computers. That's the idea. And this ended up damaging equipment because these computers, this control system that controlled heavy machinery, or hardware, it went and was like, you have a centrifuge? Let's spin that a bit faster than it can handle. Let's break the device. And so this went and damaged the equipment by sending signals to the device itself that it was controlling to do bad things, okay, and break themselves. And so this damaged equipment in a uranium enrichment plant in Iran, back in 2008. That was when this started, and this is a picture of it, the place. And rumor has it, rumor has it that the U.S. and Israel built this together, in fact. And obviously we can't prove that. But this is a very sophisticated worm, I think, and it's a cool little example that it doesn't have to self-replicate everywhere to be considered a worm. It can be very insidious and only target specific things. Okay, so that's an example of a worm. And now let's talk about this target breach. So back in 2013, maybe you've heard about this, maybe you remember, Target got hacked pretty badly. And it wasn't actually Target that got hacked. Originally, I should say. They found their way in, and then they found some issues that they could exploit, but the way that they got in was not through Target. They got in through this company called Fazio Mechanical. I assume that's how you pronounce it. It was just a tiny little business, had like 150 employees max, and it handled like HVAC stuff, some heating, air conditioning, refrigeration, maintenance for Target as well as other companies. And so these people, the workers who worked for this place, they would eventually go to Target. They would eventually log into a Target system. Okay, that's the key. And so the way that they ended up hacking was they sent out this phishing email. And if you haven't heard of this term, it's interesting. Again, PH in front of everything instead of an F for some reason in hacking lingo. But phishing is when you try and pretend that you're somebody else in order to obtain sensitive information that, well, sure, if it was my bank, I'll give them my password. They're my bank. But it really wasn't your bank. Okay, that's the idea. They tried to pretend that they were, I don't know, some service, maybe Microsoft or something, and they were not. Okay, so some employee fell for this phishing scam and clicked on a link. That is Freudian slip. Clicked on a link and installed a virus onto this employee's machine. Okay. And it stole some usernames and passwords eventually once it got plugged into a Target system. Okay, it found its way onto it. And what hackers did, based on this, they managed to finagle their way into Target systems to get access to credit card data. Okay, so they had been storing that in a special place that they thought was not connected to the outside, but oh man was it. And they ended up stealing quite a few credit card numbers and selling them on the black market, and there was a lot of fraud that happened because of it. All right, and banks ended up having to spend, I think the number was $200 million to go and reissue those credit cards, and that number doesn't even count the amount of fraud that took place. So there's several millions of dollars in fraud as well on those stolen credit cards. Okay, isn't that fun? Technology is wonderful. But sometimes bad things can still happen. All right, biometrics now. I think we can get through this today. Biometrics, what are those? Well, this is bio, like life, metrics, like measurements. And so it's things like fingerprints, for example. Fingerprints, shapes of irises. Etc. There are plenty of biological features, including your DNA, of course, that is unique, just to you. And so if we could use that to get through our doors, like use it as a key, that would be ideal, because we will never lose our fingerprints, most likely. It will never lose our eyes, most likely. So that can work as a very good key that we'll never use, that we'll never lose. And so what happens here is that, well, you've probably heard of this. Like somebody in a movie scans their eye and they're let into the secret control room. Oops, sorry. And so it's used a lot in places where there's really high security. Like, we're not going to make a key because that key could just get copied. We're going to use these biometric features instead. And so, like, I don't know, people at airports that work there, they go through biometric scanning to go in before they start working. And so this is all nice. It's really good for security, but of course, it's technology. It can be fooled. Biometrics can be fooled, but it is quite difficult. And as long as the people who are making these biometric things, these systems, they keep on advancing, trying to outpace the hackers, this is good news, I think. So instead of all of these bad things, there are still some good things going on. All right, that's the idea. And then I think the last two slides, a good thing and then maybe a bad thing, depending on what you think. All right, so this thing is called TLS. It stands for Transport Level Security. And it's the way that the internet is kept safe. So there's a protocol called HTTPS that uses TLS to transfer things. So when you go and buy something from Amazon, you go to https:// not http:// there's an S, that's the key. You go to amazon.com/blah, and that's where you make your transactions. And so the idea is you have your computer and some box of a server somewhere. This is Amazon. This is you. And the connection that you make in between each other, the way that you transfer information in both directions, uses TLS. Okay, transport layer security. And the way that all of your information is kept secure is it's a cryptographic protocol. So it's very possible, and it's valid to use RSA that we know about to make this transaction. We're sharing keys. Like, you have a public key, I also have a private key, and so does Amazon. Okay, and yeah, that's how things are kept safe. And the way that you know it's Amazon is because you trust it, because it has a certificate that, again, is using cryptography to say that, yes, this is the place that I was intending on going. Nobody stole Amazon servers and tried to pretend that they were Amazon. This certificate is valid. Okay? So you might see this. There's a little check mark next to places. So this little lock verified that this is a place that you can go. Okay? And then finally, let's talk about backdoors for law enforcement, and then we'll get out of here. So, it is often the case that law enforcement agencies, FBI for example, they don't like it when things are encrypted, and they don't have a key. They're unbreakably encrypted. So they're back a couple years ago, maybe a few years ago, there was a murder investigation going on, and they had to pause because they couldn't figure out how to unlock an iPhone that had a passcode protecting its lock screen. Okay? They couldn't figure out the passcode, and Apple, like, I forget what happened, but it wasn't so easy to unlock it. Okay? And so a lot of companies are asked by countries, governments, things like that, to include backdoors for them. And a backdoor is just a way to get in that is unencrypted, a way to break encryption. Okay? And they put those into their software and their systems. And so I guess the main question that we can finally end on, going back to our original topics, is this okay? And let's ask our boys. So Kant, he would see it as an always kind of thing. Like, should we always be handing over our phones? Should we always be, like, be insecure? Should we always give things to the, to law enforcement when they ask for it? And that could go either way. And now this is kind of in the way, I'm sorry. Let's move the words a little bit. There we go. And this could totally go either way, depending on your viewpoint. This is a qualified statement. Should we always give things to everyone? Like, should I let my neighbor see my text from last night? No, you shouldn't have to do that. But maybe law enforcement, maybe you should. So Kant could argue either way. Like, no, this is my private data, or, well, it's law enforcement. Surely they'll do something okay with it. Okay? And so that is, those are the arguments there. And then Milligan would also ask, like, what's the use? What's the utility? And so then you have your arguments for and your arguments against. And we could talk about those just like Kant might think of them. What's one argument for a backdoor for law enforcement? And I encourage you to pause the video and think about these yourself, but I'll pretend there's a class in front of me, and you guys came up with this instead. A good argument for is something like, well, this will help convict people who are criminals. And maybe they didn't have any other evidence other than this phone that they couldn't unencrypt. Otherwise, this person that deserves to go to jail is not going to jail. Something like that. And then an argument against is, of course, probably privacy. This is my private data. Nobody should get to see it. And these are going to, the scale is going to tip one way or another depending on your own personal beliefs. Okay? And so there's no right answer again, as usual. But at least now we know how to think about it. There we go. So I guess I'll leave you on this question. Like, what do you think? Think about that. That'll be good preparation. All right. That's all I wanted to say here, I think. And I'll let you go now. I'll see you in the next lecture.